Hear me.
Скажи мне, американец, в чем сила?
А вы что, собираетесь на ней жениться?
Да.
Ух, красота-то какая, лепота.
Таможня дает добро.
И вообще не называй меня, пожалуйста, Вероникой. Кто я? Вот кто я?
Отныне русской земле единый быть.
Don't torture me, I can't live without him.
Hi, my name's Ali. This is the Russophiles Unite podcast, where we watch Russian films and films with a Russian connection. As always, I'm joined by a guest, and today my guest is Alex. Hi, Alex.
Hello.
So, Alex, could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Alex. I am a writer and trainer, and I work with people who work with children and young people.
Okay, so what are you training them to do?
Generally to do church-based children's and youth work, training them in lots of different techniques, how to explore different ideas with children and young people, how to help people with additional needs, join in to their fullest, and then anything else that people ask me.
Fair enough. So it's quite a creative, sort of dramatic...
Yes, yeah. Drama plays a big part, certainly in the training.
Sure.
A lot of that is acting and entertainment, to the most part, so that you help people enjoy what could be quite dry subjects.
Sure, yeah, because often it's not necessarily the material, it's just how it's presented in a lot of cases. Or maybe it is dry material.
Well, it's a mixture, actually.
Yeah.
And most of the people I work with are volunteers, so they're giving up a Saturday or a weekday evening, and so you don't want them to give up their precious free time and then be bored or wish they were somewhere else. So
Yes, if it's kind of like your work and you have to be there and you're getting paid to be there, then motivation comes along. But if it's so you've also done in terms of the film we're watching today, we're going to be watching Fiddler on the Roof. Mm-hmm. You've been in some musicals yourself over the years.
Yeah, that's right. It's one of my major hobbies is to be involved in the production and performance of mainly musicals or musical concerts. So I've been in a wide range of different musicals across the years, but never Fiddler on the Roof. So...
Okay, so maybe in future.
Maybe in future. I think I'm not quite old enough to play the main character yet.
I was going to say, you still got a few years or some very heavy makeup before you're Tevye ready. But
that's right.
Yeah. I'm not convinced that at the moment you'll pass for having 3 or 4 basically adult daughters.
No, I don't think I would pass for that, and I can't grow good enough beard either.
Oh yeah.
So there'll be fake beards ahoy if I were to play it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess casting calls are much easier for Tevye these days with, the sort of whole hipster beard.
Yeah, hipster beard is a good thing if you want to play Tevye.
Although maybe the slick back hair less so.
Yeah, I don't think he had a man bun.
Yeah, you'll stand out a little bit in the shtetl. Yes, not very traditional. So you probably picked up, if you've seen the film before, that we've both seen this one already.
Yeah, I've seen both the film and the last time I saw this story was an amateur production in Kettering, of all places.
Oh, okay.
So, yes, that was the last time I saw it. I've seen it on stage more recently than seeing it on screen.
So it's been a few years then.
Yeah, so the plot is a little bit hazy for me, and where all the songs come and what the purpose of the songs are and how they all play out is a little bit hazy, so I'm looking forward to catching up with it again.
Sure. Now, before we get into the film, I feel like I'm obliged to put in a bit of a disclaimer. Now, as far as our subject matter for this podcast in general, it's Russian culture, things with a Russian connection, but this one is probably on the more tangential, dubious as being included. the reason I've decided to include it, okay, the real reason is that I like this film, I enjoyed watching it, and I wanted to watch it again. And I wanted to have Alex on the programme, and this seemed like a good way of linking it in. But in terms of like justification as this being a Russian-connected film, well, my justification is it happened in the Russian Empire.
That's right, and it's based on stories. Now, I tried to pronounce his surname, and I can't remember it.
Yes, the name of the original writer who the story is based on is, I'm going to have a go at it, is Sholem Aleichem.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you there. Not being a Russian speaker myself, or indeed a Yiddish speaker.
No.
They were all written in Yiddish, but written, by him. And he had the Terve, the dairyman, I think, was his base. Yeah. And Terve and His Daughters is another book of his. So they're all, written. The base stories are all written from that Jewish, Yiddish, Russian perspective, or Ukrainian perspective.
Yes.
And they will have been westernized to fit the more traditional 1950s, 60s musical style.
Sure.
But, that base material is still there. So.
Yeah. The reason I'm glad you brought up the Ukrainian thing, because so my understanding of it from, Wikipediaing and then, finding slightly more reliable like Encyclopedia Britannica online, frantic research last night was that the area where a lot of Jewish people in the Russian Empire lived was called the Cherta Osiedlosti, which is the Pale of Settlement, which was, as if I'm understanding it right, Catherine the Great basically decided that all the Jews in the Russian Empire should live in this place, and if you want to settle somewhere else, tough, you're going to the Pale of Settlement. But where the Pale of Settlement is, I think most of it is in modern Ukraine. I think a bit of it's in Belarus, and I think it extends into Poland. So there's not much of what is now Russia included within it. So that makes it a bit of a controversial subject with recent events. But I think I'm going to tiptoe around it, and then I'm going to now cowardly make a cowardly retreat. But just wanted to acknowledge that, yes, the place that this is set, it's a fictional shtetl, Jewish, mostly Jewish. I think they would they could be mixed to an extent, but the shtetl would have been somewhere that's now no longer in what modern Russia is. But,
I think the shtetl, certainly in the film, is predominantly Jewish, but there is always that pressure from outside where non-Jews would live around them, and there would always be that worry about how the Russian army and I suppose you say Gentile settlements around them would react to them. And there was always that sense of danger that I think was portrayed in the original source material and in the film too. There is a mix of people in the Pale of Settlement, but that's where all the Jewish people would live,
Yeah. All right. Before we move on to the film, you've actually spent some time living in Eastern Europe or yourself, which I wanted to ask you about.
I have, yes. So after leaving university, I went to live in Brno in the Czech Republic, and I was there for a couple of years, and I taught English as a foreign language.
Hey, former English teachers unite.
So it was a fascinating place to live, actually. I went there probably around 8 or 9 years after communism had fallen, and they'd been an individual country separate from Slovakia for a slightly less time than that. So it was still finding its feet in terms of what kind of a country it was, and the towns, the bigger towns like Prague and Brno, which was the second city, were slightly ahead of the rest of the country in terms of being westernized and being opened up to the rest of the world. So, it was an interesting time to be there, actually, as people found their way and was still turning their gaze from the east to the west.
Yeah.
So there was still a lot of anxiety about communism.
Would it come back?
Okay. Yeah. So certainly one of my colleagues at least was very active in anti-communism rallies and things like that. So concerned was she and her family that communism might make it come back. And obviously it wasn't something that they particularly wanted to return to. But I mean, that's less so now they're in the European Union. But, when I was there, they weren't in the Union as such. So, they we're still quite concerned. But yeah, a fascinating place and really good to get to know people from a different culture. Because although I'm sure your listeners will realise in terms of being in Russia, although some of it is very similar to being in Britain or America or wherever there are bits of it which are just flummoxing. And you think, I've no idea why culturally you have done what you have just done, but it's something that you would normally do every day that I just don't understand. And so, yeah, I would sometimes think, I've got this Czech thing sorted, and then something would, massive culture shock would come along and unnerve me slightly.
I'm putting you on the spot here, but can you think of anything like specific that was...
No, I can't actually. I just remember that happening a lot. And so it might just be certain ways of doing things. It might just be certain attitudes that people have that I would take for granted the opposite of what they thought or something like that. And that would be surprising. So anything from... Somebody told me off for wearing shoes in my own house once.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So,
that definitely rings true to experiences I had in Russia. No,
so I would always take my shoes off when I went to somebody else's house. But if it was my own house, I wouldn't bother. Then somebody came and visited me and told me off.
Like, what are you doing? Yeah, that's a good point. I can't remember whether I learnt not to have my shoes on indoors early on in my time in Russia, because once I'd been there a while, I just started doing it because, you started having people over more often and people would kind of go, what are you doing? Yeah.
So and I think probably because it's where, they hadn't been open up to lots of different cultures for that long, they would be surprised by different ways of doing things. So, the British way of doing something, or, I had some friends who were Indians and some friends who were Americans. All those different ways of doing things actually were quite foreign to them, and so they couldn't cope with non-Czech speakers speaking Czech.
Okay.
So they were. If I got everything right, it was fine. But if I made any mistakes, they could not understand what I was saying.
Oh yeah, that rings true with my experience speaking Russian as well. As people aren't. Well, in Russia it's a bit different because you have various ethnic groups from around the former Soviet Union and also within the modern Russian Federation who Russian isn't their first language. Yeah. So they're used to hearing a certain section of what would be like fluent non-native Russian speakers who can communicate very effectively but not very grammatically like absolutely on point. But coming across someone like me who just doesn't have the vocabulary, is kind of stuttery, find it hard to put a sentence together, they're just like, I can't be bothered with this most of the time, which is understandable, but just growing up as native English speakers in a fairly diverse part of the world, we're kind of used to people having various, levels of command of English, and we're just like...
That's true, and I think because English is the lingua franca for most of the world, you are used to hearing English spoken in a whole variety of ways, and you are used to getting the meaning from, a whole way of saying things. Lots of different ways of saying things, which isn't the same if you speak a language that is, 10 million people. Yeah. You're not used to people trying to speak your language and doing it badly. Yeah. And using all the different, wrong genders and things like that at various points. And that people found it very hard to understand me if I was using the wrong form of a certain word, for example.
Well, I'm guessing Czech has all the fun, or at least a lot of the same fun ending stuff, declension, that Russian has.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it has the bonus of being in Latin script, but yes, it has very difficult consonant sounds, certainly, that are hard to wrap your mouth around. And so, yes, they take some mastering as well.
Okay, so I think we should probably get back to the movie. So... what we always do, if you're a regular listener, you'll know we say "Поехали," which is what Yuri Gagarin said when he was blasting off to be the first man in space. But given that we're watching our first musical for the podcast, I thought we would sing it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, "Поехали."
That was beautiful. I'm sure if anybody hasn't already switched off, they have done now.
So, welcome back. We've just watched Fiddler on the Roof from 1971, directed by Norman Jewison. And before we get into what we thought of it, Alex is going to give us a quick plot summary.
I am, that's right, yes. So set at the turn of the 20th century in 1905 in a fictional little village probably in Ukraine called Anatevka. It focuses on Tervia, a father who's married to Golda, and they have 5 daughters.
Which he's thrilled about.
Which he is thrilled about because it means that he has very little dowry to spare. They're a very poor family and he has to provide dowry for each of them. And it centres around, well, on the face of it, it centres around the marriage of their daughters. But also there's this great idea of change that goes through the whole film. So,
or not.
Or not, as the case may be. So his first daughter has a marriage arranged in the traditional way, which then never happens because she announces her love for a poor tailor. And Tervia allows this to go ahead. The second daughter falls in love with a firebrand from Kiev, and they don't ask for his permission.
They ask for his blessing.
They only ask for his blessing. And so another step further, and Tervia allows it to happen.
Again, somewhat reluctantly.
Somewhat reluctantly, but he thinks he's moving with the times. But the third daughter comes along and falls in love with a Russian soldier. And this Tervia won't stretch that far to allowing his daughter to marry outside the Jewish faith. But they do it anyway. And so this daughter, Chava, is then dead to Tervia. And also through the film, there is a theme of change in terms of the Russian Revolution. As the firebrand from Kiev, Perchik, he foments revolution in the city and is arrested and sent to Siberia. And also then there's a change of the village itself as the Russian authorities become more and more heavy-handed with the dealings with the Jewish inhabitants of Anatevka, and eventually they're all forced to leave by an edict coming from St. Petersburg. So, in a very unhappy ending, the musical ends with the Jewish villagers leaving and going their separate ways, leaving Anatevka for anywhere from Krakow to Chicago. And there we leave it. And Tervia and what remains of his family go off to New York.
And just next door to Chicago, apparently.
Next door to Chicago, so yes.
Thank you for that summary. You managed to cram a 3-hour movie into that tiny little space. That's kind of a miracle of compression. You'd seen it before. How did it measure up to your recollection of it? Did you enjoy it more, less?
It's really interesting because the last time I saw it, it was on stage, and I was mesmerised by the accents in that particular production.
Tell me about the accents.
Well, Terve and Golda decided to go full-on Russian, kind of Yiddish. But the further down the cast list you got, the more Kettering they sounded, as it was being done in Kettering.
For listeners outside of the UK, Kettering is kind of in the vicinity of London.
It's the East Midlands. It's between London and Birmingham-ish.
Okay, so my geography even slightly off.
So yes, I just sat there for most of the time watching that, wondering why the director had allowed some people to be Russian and some people to be obviously British. Yeah. And I think you either do all or nothing. Yeah. So, yeah. But it made me really think about change, actually. That's the one big thing that came through of this rewatch of the film, in terms that you see the very first number of the musical is called Tradition, and it outlines the roles of all the people in the village, and indeed probably in the Jewish faith in terms of the tradition that's built up around it. So the role of the father and the mother and the children. And it really sets the scene for this is how things are. This is the way we do things.
And it's always been this way.
And it's always been this way, yes. And so
there's a lovely bit where Tevye says, and let me explain this tradition to you. And then he pauses for effect. And I don't know. We've just been doing it a long time.
Yeah. But it's all, this is what holds us together. And throughout the film, that tradition is kind of chipped away at. And Terve is forced to, or allows himself to bend to these new ways of doing things until, of course, his daughter decides that she wants to marry outside the faith, and for him that's a step too far. But, all these changes happen, and, that really kind of made me think about how communities put up these barriers to retain their distinctiveness, really, I think that is. and to stop kind of, not infection from the outside world, but the outside world having an impact on them. And there was a lot of the older men, when there was seems to be only one man in the village of Anatevka who could read Russian.
Yeah.
And so he would be relied on from news from the outside world. And a lot of times he ran in with a paper, and they said they didn't care about what the outside world was doing and what was happening.
Oh, we're not interested.
Yeah, we're not
it doesn't
interested.
concern us.
Yeah, so that whole kind of looking inwards and being, this is how we do things. The rest of the country doesn't matter in terms of, but this is how, but they can't stop that change coming in. Terve's own family suddenly has change happening all over the place, but the village too, and the country as a whole. It's not long until the revolution happens.
Yeah, because in 1905, I mean, this is set. It's not totally specific, but it's probably, if it's not 1905, it's immediately before.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you don't have the proper Russian revolutions happening for, another 12 years, but they have this basically series of revolts and uprisings all across the country that year. So it definitely, it does a really good job of capturing that this stuff is afoot, I guess.
Yeah. And all the Pale of Settlement, comes to an end with the end of the Russian involvement in First World War. That Pale of Settlement kind of all comes to a place. So it's all happening, and even if they didn't get cleared out by the authorities at the end of the film, they would have been gone,
Yeah.
They would be living in a completely different place come the end of the First World War. So this old idea of things changing, but you're trying to grip onto the way that you've always done something to retain your identity, and yet things happening that are beyond your control in terms of, getting in your way of upholding that particular way of doing things. Yeah, that really spoke to me, actually. It's really interesting.
Did you enjoy the performances?
I did. I think Topol, who played Tervia, that is such an iconic performance that everyone who plays Tervia after that always owes a debt to Topol and the way that he performs it. So
we were talking while we were watching it a bit about his kind of like this drunken kind of arm/chest upper body shake thing that he does.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether his character has had too much to drink, and there is one incident where he gets very drunk with Laser Wolf, who we think is going to be marrying his first daughter. But yes, interesting thing about that is that I think that was a bit of a controversial casting choice. Mm-hmm. Because on Broadway he'd been played by Zero Mostel.
Oh yes,
which I have to say, I'm quite glad that it was Topol, because I thought he was great, but also because I've seen about half of the original producers, and I was on a plane, I was tired, it's not the best time to see a film, but I was so massively irritated by Zero Mostel. It was kind of like, I'm just kind of transposing, of course, he's an actor, so I'm sure he didn't play it exactly the same way, but in my mind, he's being as annoying as he was in this. And I'm going, nope, I'm glad it's the way that it is. But yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, and Zero Mostel went on to own other iconic performances like his role in The Producers, and like his role in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, where he plays the main character, the slave, who is a kind of ducking and diving, trying to survive in a difficult world kind of slave. And so he really made that part himself. But it's not unheard of for Broadway shows to be turned into films, but the original stars not to make it on celluloid.
Yes, I'm trying to think of...
My Fair Lady is the best example of that, where Julie Andrews played it on stage, but they decided to... Oh, I've got myself into trouble now. Audrey Hepburn. That's right. I was about to say Everardo, but no. But in the end, they put Audrey Hepburn on and dubbed her voice when she was singing. So,
and Julie Andrews never ever got another role in her life. No, that's being flippant, but yeah.
But yes, I mean, Topol obviously is outstanding in this. And even with his little drunken dance, which everybody then, whenever you play Topol, you have to put that little drunken dance in, and you have to sing, you sing it all the way Topol sang it.
Yeah.
Otherwise people don't recognise it.
Yes. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. This is not Tervia. But some of the other performances were good too.
Yeah, who else did you like?
I liked Golda. I thought she was the right mix of affection and severity, you might say.
Yes.
In terms of that
Yes.
traditional mother role that she played there, I think.
Yes, it was kind of interesting because Tevye, in the midst of all this change and upheaval, some of the time he has a little mini tantrum and tries to put his foot down, and she's kind of like, yeah, really.
And I thought Motul, who plays the tailor who eventually marries Terevye's first daughter, Seitel.
Yeah.
I enjoyed his performance too. Yeah. And it was nice to see some future stars of BBC sitcoms appear as well. Ruth Maddock plays Fruma Sarah, who only appears in a dream sequence, and I thought she was excellent.
I was hoping you would mention her because, you're right, as you say, not in it for very long, but giving maximum effort for the time.
Oh, yeah, she certainly does. Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of goes all sort of Hammer horror for that grave sequence, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I like it. I remember seeing that because the first time I saw it, I had very little idea of what it was about, and I was surprised how kind of, I mean, it's hammy, but it's a creepy kind of hammy. They do it quite well.
That's the other thing that I thought actually is the way that faith is woven into it, but also there's a superstition around it too, and so there's a lot of superstition, a lot of spitting.
Yes, especially Golda.
Golda to ward off evil eyes and all of that business. But and that was all woven into the dream sequence where basically Terevye is trying to get his first daughter out of her arranged marriage so that she can marry the tailor. Yeah. But he has to convince his wife, and so he pretends that he's had a dream where the butcher, Laserwolf, who is the intended in the arranged marriage, his first
probably
wife,
older than Tevye.
Yeah, he is. I think he is older than Tevye, isn't he? His first wife comes to Terevye in this fake dream to say that this marriage shouldn't go ahead and she will ruin their marriage if
or will she'll actually come in the night and kill.
That's one way of ruining a marriage.
Yeah.
So that whole thing kind of plays on that superstition and being able to see your ancestors. So Terevye very cleverly starts the dream off with his wife's grandmother.
Yes, who's also called Seitel.
And so there's all that realm of superstition and all these things that build up around faiths, and actually you think, well, that's not when you think about a superstition, you think, well, I don't think that's actually a founding part of this faith.
Yeah, you kind of feel like if you've talked to the rabbi about it, I'm not sure you should really be doing that. Yeah. But I really like that sequence. It's a lot of fun, but it does have a kind of creepy.
It does, yeah. And when they end up in a double bed in a grave, with everyone looking over them, throwing dirt onto them, as if they were going to bury them. I mean, that is, when you think about it, it's quite a spooky ending.
Yeah. But it's funny that all the other ghosts are terrified of Fruma Sarah, although presumably she's the same thing as they are. They're all running away.
Yeah, she bursts out from underneath the ground when everyone else is just kind of sitting around.
They're all dead and covered in cobwebs and, pale and gothy. But yes.
But she's actually still buried in the ground. Yeah. So it's a great sequence.
Yeah, so Tevye is quite a rogue. He's funny because he's funny for a start. He is amusing. He's as that sequence demonstrates, and that ruse, he's not above bending the truth a little bit.
No, that's true.
He does have this one bit early on where he winds up one of his neighbours by reminding them of how because they had this dispute over this price of this horse, and he goes, it was 12 years old when he told them it was 6, and then it just starts this argument off.
Yeah, that's isn't it? Because it's an argument that happened a long time ago.
Yeah,
and he says, and they're friends now, and then he immediately reignites the argument.
He just whispers in the guy's ear,
and the whole thing blows up, and there's a massive argument about this really old dispute, isn't there? Yeah. So yes, he is very mischievous, and even though he's not very learned and not very, he's the milkman, so he doesn't hold an important role. He still seems to be the focus of the village.
Yeah,
everyone respects him and, will come to him to talk to him. And so several times, I know probably because he's the main character in the musical, therefore everyone comes to him, but he seems still to be the focus of the village.
Well, and he's thoughtful. I mean, it makes a point of how he wants his daughters to be married to learned people, so he kind of values that. I mean, partly perhaps for the status thing, but in each of the cases when they're talking about the daughters being married off, it actually kind of stops and it pauses, and it's basically freeze frame. They play it very similarly each time in terms of the way it's shot, like you see the daughter a long way off. I think the funniest instance is when he's talking to Laser Wolf, actually, and he's explaining that he wants to marry his daughter, and it freeze frames to his face, Laser Wolf's old beardy face, and he's just thinking, and he goes, on the other hand, like 4 or 5 times, and just kind of he thinks everything through in his mind, and reasons it out, and often ends up going kind of the way he sort of wanted to. But he's clearly a very thoughtful guy, and you don't often see films that have a character who has such a, from our early-ish 21st century viewpoint, like quite a menial job, portrayed in such a kind of thoughtful way, I guess, which is nice for a change.
Yeah, he is very philosophical about things, isn't he? In terms of it, and you see that when he prays, he's just chatting to God, so it's all very down to earth. Yeah. In a way as well. So rather than seeing the rabbi pray or seeing them a few times you see them in the synagogue, and how they act there, actually, when he's doing it, it seems a very real faith that he has, and a very real thinking process that he has about how he makes his decisions. And so when he's talking about whether he should allow, his daughters to marry whoever, when he has those kind of things when everyone else freezes and he goes on the other hand, you can see his workings in action and his faith in action and his love of his family in action there as well. And it is very, philosophical and humane. Is that the right word? It's a very human portrayal of a character who could be very caricatured and is at times very caricatured.
Sure. But... And I think, if you told this story from a different character's observer's point of view and you didn't see the kind of the internal monologue and him talking to God, then you just, you wouldn't necessarily know all the stuff that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great Basil exposition way of doing a device, but it's very effective, much better than a voiceover or something like that, because it's part of his character.
Yeah, and it's quite clever how they do it, because initially it's like he starts off like properly breaking the fourth wall and talking to the audience. Yeah. But later on, he's always kind of doing it with his eyes looking up, and it's more like he's not talking to you, the audience, particularly. He's talking to God, but you're kind of getting to sit in on the conversation. Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting...
Yeah. And he always looks the same way when he prays. He always looks up and to the right. And you think, he's praying. I know he's praying. Look up and to the right.
But it's more of a sort of a chat than which is interesting to see it shown that way. Oh, gosh. We have to get into the difficult Russian stuff.
Well, I mean... I think you mentioned earlier, Jews and the Jewish people have been persecuted by lots and lots of different... So actually, this story could have been set in quite a lot of places.
Sure.
In terms of where, right across Europe, Jewish people have been persecuted. So, although it sits in a Russian context here, within this Russian Pale of Settlement and the edicts coming from St. Petersburg, it could have been set anywhere, really, in terms of the change and the community trying to remain the same while outward pressures want it to change. Yeah. And time rushing on and, new ideas coming in. So I thought that was quite interesting, actually.
I thought the constable character they did quite a lot with not very much screen time with him.
Was he the fellow with the moustache?
With the big black...
The good moustache, that one.
Yes, the legendary cinematic moustaches. No.
Didn't he have grey hair and a black moustache?
Yes.
Always suspicious.
A distinctive look. But he was initially, his relationship with Tevye anyway was portrayed as somewhat sympathetic. Like, he respected Tevye, albeit with caveats. He kind of said, you're a pretty good guy, even though you're a Jew.
Yes.
And it's kind of like, Tevye's like, thanks for the compliment. So
doesn't he say, I've never had a compliment like that before?
Yes, I think he does.
Or you don't get a compliment like that very often. Or something
yeah,
like that.
which is kind of like, that is a horrible thing to say. But yes, but it's kind of, he's gone to, he's clearly a very flawed character, but he sort of tried to do something rather than just nothing. You kind of see that he really hates having to carry out his orders, but he's just, I guess, caught in a position where he feels like, it's carry out my orders or lose my job or something worse. Yeah. So he does ultimately.
There is that scene with him presumably in his police station, whatever you used to call it, where his superior comes and tells him that he has to do a mini pogrom almost. Just to keep the Jews on their toes. I don't know why he would do it, but but he resists that.
Or he at least offers some pushback. Because you get the feeling that this superior is kind of like very committedly anti-Semitic, whereas the constable himself is too, but in a more kind of casual, and he doesn't particularly want to stir things up. He looks down on the Jews because they're different, although he can clearly, not so much that he has no respect for Tevye, because he seems to like him. Yeah. But it's just that he ultimately doesn't have the... it seems really judgmental to say the courage, because I've never been in that situation. Yeah. And it's kind of almost like the sort of classic dilemma, I was only following orders type.
Yeah, that's true.
But they could have just portrayed him as just being a heartless, like, one-dimensional, evil baddie who's just there to to just kind of to persecute them and move the plot on, whereas they actually give him a bit more of a other side to him.
Yeah, some of the Russians are portrayed as hooligans and racist thugs, but there are those two sympathetic Russian characters, like you said, the policeman, sergeant, constable, whoever he was. And
sympathetic, at least up to a point.
Up to a point, but yes. And so, yes, he's not willing to put his own life in danger to help the Jewish people of Anatevka. But then the Russian who ends up marrying Tevye's third daughter, Chava, he is much more so. He gets very little screen time, but actually he is perhaps the most sympathetic Russian in that he gives up his life in Anatevka to go, and when all the Jews have to leave, he goes as well. Because he doesn't want to stick around where people are being poorly treated like that. And so actually...
Which is what he says.
Yeah. And so actually he is, he goes, and they end up going off to Poland.
Yeah. And there's a tragic irony in that, because, from the point of a view of a audience at our time, or, watching it back on Broadway, you would know that people who had ended up in Krakow, especially if one of them was Jewish,
their descendants would be in trouble.
Would have been in trouble, or even, for young people like that in their old age. They're about, late teens.
That's right. So they
jump 40 years forward. And,
they're all in 50s, 60s.
Yeah, so they could conceivably be around. So there's a kind of a horrible kind of irony or subtext there. You read too much into it, I guess. I don't know.
Well, let's hope they made it to America or something like that.
Yes,
where everyone else was going.
Yeah. So it's funny because it's such a bleak and down ending. Or I guess second half of the film, but the first half of the film is just quite joyous, even though life is tough.
Yes,
I quite like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of well-known, but If I Were a Rich Man is the most well-known.
Which people know even if they don't know that that's what it's from. They know that.
Biddy biddy bum. but other things like Tradition and Sunrise Sunset, and Matchmaker, actually people might know Matchmaker as well, they all occur in the first act.
And
then the second act is much, as you say, is much more downbeat because the wheels come off Terve's wagon almost in his family and in his in the village too. So,
do you have a favourite of the songs?
I was thinking of that actually. I quite liked the very final song, Anatevka, where they describe where they're all told to leave and they're resigned to leaving, and they're basically trying to convince themselves that Anatevka is not really a play, it's nothing to them, well, what do we have here? Just a piece of cloth, just a stick of wood. That's all Anatevka is.
Whilst conveying that actually no.
And so, this is a song they end up leaving, and I quite like that song too. Well, I mean, If I Were a Rich Man is a fun song.
Yeah.
As is Matchmaker.
Yeah, I like, because I used to be, I wanted to mention this in the introduction and just kind of forgot it, but I used to be very down on musicals and just write off a whole genre of film, and indeed theatre, because I was just kind of like the usual sort of literalist, well, that doesn't happen. People don't start singing in the middle of things. But I like the fact that it gives you time to explore ideas in an entertaining way that you would be hard to do in the same way if it was, a realistic drama with the same plot. Like the whole Matchmaker thing in particular, I like how it starts off with one of the three elder daughters being not all that excited about the fact that the matchmaker's here, and then the next two down from her just being all swoony and like, oh, matchmaker, make me a match, and, wouldn't being married be fantastic and lovely? But as they explore it through the song, where they come to the conclusion that this is a lottery and there's a chance that we really won't do well out of it.
Yeah, well, one of the sisters pretends to be the matchmaker for the other two,
That's
and
very
she
entertaining.
she comments that one of the the imaginary men who's going to marry her sister, he drinks a lot, and beats his wife when he's sober.
But don't worry,
because he's always drunk. So there we go, and you just think, whoa, that's a bit dark.
yeah.
But yeah, and it's interesting to think about that song and then think about where they ended up. In terms of how, idealistic they were when they started singing that song.
Yeah.
And yet, when they actually get married, increasingly, they are in increasingly difficult situations that are not the ones that they imagined when they were at the beginning of the show singing Matchmaker. So, one ends up with a man she loves, but they don't have anything.
Yeah.
Another, did you write that phrase down about...
yes. Where was it?
They're so happy.
They're so happy they don't realise how miserable they are. Yeah.
So that's their first couple. But the second couple, when Perchik gets arrested in Kiev and is sent to Siberia, Hodl goes to Siberia, and there's quite a sad farewell on the train tracks.
Very much so. I love the way that's shot as well. Just like you just have this very stark, not very substantial railway hut, and just some of the angles they do with the train just look beautiful. It just looks incredibly bleak.
Yes.
And, if you've ever said goodbye to somebody at an airport or a railway station at some point, you can kind of relate to that, except she's still teenage girl, maybe 17, 18, and she's going on a train from somewhere in modern-day Ukraine all the way to Siberia back then, on her own, when she wouldn't have gone pretty much anywhere in her
possibly
life.
Hadn't left the village before.
Yeah. Because, you know, even if you're a 17-year-old now, you know, you will have gone on school trips and bus rides to places that are far from your home.
Yeah.
That's...
and then the third daughter, of course, you know, imagining at the beginning that she's going to marry a lovely man, marries a Russian and is dead to her father.
Yeah, ostracised by her community.
Completely cut off. So, again, starts off very jolly and then goes very dark.
Yeah.
Quite sudden.
I mean, it is nice that they have that moment of reconciliation at the end, so it isn't like...
Yes, he does make an attempt at reconciliation. You're right.
Yeah.
But I mean, musicals of this time, they, often we point out how, just frothy they are, but a lot of them have quite dark scenes in them. Where, somebody will die or, somebody gets in real danger or somebody's life really goes downhill.
Yeah.
And often those aren't the songs or the scenes that people remember of Oklahoma or South Pacific or something like that. But, when you sit and think about what happens to some of these characters, there's often quite dark stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously West Side Story is the most famous of those where, a love story goes incredibly badly wrong.
Yes.
And you end up on really quite depressing notes at the end.
Yeah.
Not quite as depressing as Fiddler on the Roof, I think. I would have to say that was slightly more depressing.
Yeah.
In terms of its where its characters end up. But yeah, I mean, musicals a lot of them do have quite distinct messages in between all the froth.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's kind of like, well, to quote Mary Poppins, the sort of spoonful of sugar to get the medicine down.
Yeah.
Because, I'm being flippant, but it does give you a more accessible way of talking about some difficult subjects, whereas if it's just like, this is going to be a film that's a bit like Schindler's List. It's like, you can watch a certain number of films that are like that, but it's, by presenting it in this kind of package, you might get people who would have written off a film that's a drama about the breakup of the shtetl or whatever. They're just going to go, yeah, do you know what? I don't think I will.
And similarly, you might help people explore difficult ideas when they wouldn't normally have wanted to see something like that. So somebody might want to see a musical, and actually you can open up quite interesting ideas through song. Because, like you say, it gives people the space to process the ideas and the storylines and the themes as they're listening to songs. But yeah, you also get, thinking about films like Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, when...
Oh, have you seen that?
Yes, I have.
Oh, okay, I've not seen it yet.
Oh, it's that mix of laughter and heartache and violence and lives destroyed. Actually, it's quite similar to a musical in the way that you have that laughter and heartbreak wrapped up in songs and things like that.
Yeah, because there's a lot that's funny in this film. More of it coming towards the beginning, admittedly. But like the line I quoted, most of them aren't like jokes per se. It's all about the tone of voice and the kind of like slightly sarcastic response.
Yes,
but yes, it is an interesting way of discussing more difficult.
It is. Yeah.
Does it make you want to explore the sort of original short stories that it's based on?
Actually, yeah, and it makes me want to find out more about the Pale of Settlement that was set up initially by Catherine the Great. Incidentally, great song by the Divine Comedy called Catherine the Great. It's hilarious.
Okay, I'll have to
have a look on that one. And developed from there.
Yeah,
and actually, let's find out why that happened and why they chose to settle people only in this place and not allow them to go out anywhere else. And then what the effect was after the First World War, when a lot of Jewish people who would have been in the Pale of Settlement ended up in different countries. And how that changed things and would affect, like you said later on with the Second World War and then the persecution by the Germans rather than the Russians this time around. So it does make me want to go out and find out more about the history, actually. And I suppose the stories by what was he called?
Sholem Aleichem.
Aleichem, that's it. And those stories would be all couched in that culture and the history of what was happening. So.
Yeah, I really want to read it to kind of compare, because obviously as the writer himself, he would have grown up in these places rather than seeing a version of that place through reading about it rather than actually having lived there, where the film which the filmmakers and the actors and all the people involved would have done. And I would be interested to see how close the versions are.
And
I've heard it's kind of the original is grittier, which makes sense.
Yes,
it would be interesting to see, to what extent.
Yeah, and how westernized those the stories that were picked for the show, and how westernized they became in order that people might be hooked in.
And are they as funny? I mean, I suspect they would be, because one of the things that people said about Sholem Aleichem, I remember reading, was that he was the Jewish Mark Twain.
Oh yes, I read that too.
Supposedly, Mark Twain, when he heard this, said, "No, I'm the American Sholem Aleichem." Which is interesting. So I mean, I'm guessing that means they're sort of the same, like wry sort of.
And Russian literature particularly is full of that kind of wry, slightly downbeat, slightly downbeat. I'm westernising my views. Slightly surreal humour in a way, aren't they? So,
yes,
added with
Yes, I mean, I kind of think the graveyard scene in this could have been sort of slightly Gogol-esque.
Yes.
All right, so I think that's where we should leave the discussion. Thank you very much, Alex, for being a wonderful guest.
Oh, you're welcome. It was great fun. Thanks very much.
So, das Vidania, everyone. So that's it for this episode, but before I go, I'd like to thank Sasha Ilukovic and the Highly Skilled Migrants for the use of their song Cold in our intro. You can find that song and the rest of their back catalogue on Bandcamp and Spotify. If you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting us by leaving a rating at Apple Podcasts or at podchaser.com. That second one, Podchaser, even lets you rate individual episodes, so if this episode particularly stood out to you, you can let other listeners know that you enjoyed it. Recommending the show on social media is hugely helpful as well. If you can spare a moment or two to do that, it would really make my day. Thank you very much. Speaking of social media, please find us and say hi on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. You can also drop us a line at roosefilesunite@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.